Hello everyone and welcome back to the Sherlock Holmes. Now I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Right? Let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. Story 1 will explore a case that occurred in the Philippines in 2021, which shocked all of Southeast Asia at the time on December 10, 2021, as the Magad couple was preparing to leave for work. They suddenly heard Janice call out, "Mom, Dad, this call." Deeply moved them. Janice was their adopted daughter, and this was the first time she had addressed the Magwads in this way since they had adopted her a few months earlier. They were overjoyed that their care and love had been reciprocated and acknowledged by their daughter. However, this joy would last only a few hours, as a tragedy was about to unfold in their family at 2:48 p.m. Janice sent a message to the family chat group saying that 3 burglars had broken into their house shortly after she posted a plea for help on social media by 3 p.m. After seeing the message on Cruz Magwood's phone, one of his colleagues pushed open his office door and said worriedly, "It seems your house has been broken into. You should go check right away." Hearing this, Cruz jumped up in panic and rushed home about 15 minutes later. Cruz arrived home by car at this point. All he knew was that his house was being burglarized, and even more terrifying, his 3 children were all inside. When he reached the door, he realized he had left his keys at work in his haste. The front door was locked, and despite Cruz's efforts to push it open, it wouldn't budge. So he began banging on the door and calling out the names of his 3 children, but no matter how loudly he shouted, there was no response. He then ran around the house yelling their names. Fortunately, the back door was locked. However, the inside of the house was eerily quiet. Cruz suddenly realized that the burglars might still be inside holding the children hostage, which was why they couldn't respond. Therefore, he decided to keep quiet and see if he could stealthily approach and find a way to rescue the children. Cruz then tiptoed through the kitchen, but when he entered the living room, he was met with a horrifying sight. The entire room was in disarray, and a strong, nauseating smell of blood hit his nostrils. Shards of a broken vase were scattered everywhere, and the carpet was soaked in blood. His 2 children lay motionless on the floor, their bodies covered in wounds and stab marks. Beside them were a knife, a hammer, and a baseball bat. His 16-year-old son, Louis, lay dead near the front door, his body covered in blood, his hands tied, and something stuffed in his mouth. His 18-year-old daughter, Gwen, lay near the bedroom door. In an even more tragic state, her entire body was covered in wounds, especially her face, which was completely disfigured. One of her ears had even been cut off. Later reports showed that Gwen's hands and arms were full of knife wounds, indicating that she had tried to resist until the very end. Seeing this scene, Cruz fell to his knees beside his children, sobbing in agony, but after a moment he tried to calm himself. He remembered that he still had an adopted daughter, Janice, and he needed to find her quickly. Cruz then took out his phone to call Janice while quickly running towards her room, praying that he wouldn't find another dead body. However, Janice's door was locked tight and her phone was unreachable. Cruz kept calling out her name loudly. Then an unexpected scene unfolded. Janice opened the door and ran towards Cruz, crying, seeing Janice soaking wet. Cruz panicked, thinking it was blood. He quickly checked her all over. Fortunately, Janice wasn't injured at all in her panic. Janice shakily explained to Cruz that 3 men had broken into the house to rob them. She was scared, so she hid under the bed. She heard Gwen and Louis screaming, but couldn't help. Finally, when everything went quiet, Janice didn't know what to do, so she took a shower. This explanation was clearly illogical. Cruz felt something was odd, but he thought his daughter was too frightened, so he didn't ask any more questions after calming Janice down. Cruz called the police and informed his wife Lella, who was at work. The incident shocked the entire town. It was a small town where everyone knew each other. The Magad family was known for their kindness. Cruz was a high school teacher and LLAA was an elementary school principal. Although their teaching income wasn't high, they were financially comfortable due to inherited land and a pig farm from their grandparents. Their eldest daughter, Gwen, born in 2003, was a smart, outgoing, and energetic girl in high school. Gwen enrolled in a pre-med program hoping to become a doctor in the future. Their youngest son, Louis, born in 2005, loved reading, drawing, and playing guitar, though only 16. He had clear goals and wanted to become a lawyer in the future. Their family was always harmonious and full of love under their parents' guidance. Gwen and Louis were enthusiastic about participating in charitable activities on weekends. The family often visited nursing homes and orphanages, donating to those in need. As teachers, the Magwads frequently helped poor students. It was through this kindness that they met Janice. In early 2021. The Magad family was invited to a party there. Gwen noticed a housemaid who looked about her age, so she approached to introduce herself. The maid's name was Janice, a year younger than Gwen. They quickly became close due to their shared interests. But Gwen wondered why a 17-year-old girl wasn't in school and had to work as a maid for others. When Gwen asked, Janice emotionally recounted her life story. She couldn't remember anything about her life before age 8. In Janice's memory, she was a child without parents at 8. She was abandoned on a large ship like a forgotten package. Luckily, a kind person posted her photo online hoping to find her parents, but no one recognized Janice. After that, she was taken to an orphanage. Janice lived there for 8 years until she was 2016, when a kind couple hired her as a maid, promising to pay her regularly, although the work wasn't easy. Janice was grateful for the opportunity. At least she had a place to call home. Janice's sad story deeply moved Gwen. The two girls began to talk frequently. Gwen introduced Janice to many of her friends and family. Their relationship grew closer and they became inseparable friends. After 6 months, Gwen and her brother felt their relationship with Janice had surpassed ordinary friendship. They came up with the idea of asking their parents to adopt Janice. Gwen, being kind-hearted, thought Janice deserved the same good education she had to pursue her dreams in the future. When they heard this suggestion from their children, the Magad couple felt quite worried. First, since Janice was already 17, they found it difficult to know how to educate her appropriately. Second, they worried that the new environment might make Janice uncomfortable and cause new emotional wounds. So the family discussed this issue many times. It was clear that all the family's concerns stemmed from their fear of not being able to provide a better life for Janice. Finally, due to Gwen's persistence, the Magwads decided to officially adopt Janice and provide her with educational opportunities. In July 2021, Janice moved in with her new family and changed her name to Janice Magad. Louis gave up his room for her and moved to sleep on the living room sofa to welcome their new member. The family organized a vacation together during the trip. They took many photos as mementos. Janice had now become a beloved member of the family. However, this change required both sides to go through an adjustment period in her new family. Janice had to learn to follow family rules. At the same time, the other family members needed to be more understanding and tolerant towards her. An incident occurred just a few months after Janice's adoption. It was during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. Gwen was busy applying for college while also tutoring Janice. At that time, Gwen's grandparents had contracted COVID-19 and needed to be quarantined, so they needed money for food and medicine. Fortunately, Cruz had just sold some piglets and earned $200. He had put this money in a piggy bank for emergencies. But when broke open the piggy bank to get the money, it was completely empty. Cruz asked his wife and children, but no one knew where the money had gone. They even suspected that a thief had broken in, but strangely, nothing else was missing. And someone was almost always at home, so the whole family started searching everywhere while looking under the carpet. In the room, they accidentally picked up Janice's school bag. Due to the pandemic, schools had switched to online learning. Although Janice's bag didn't have many books, it was surprisingly heavy. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a hidden compartment at the bottom of the bag, and the lost money was there at this moment. The Magwads felt not anger, but sadness and disappointment. They looked at Janice with confused eyes, hoping for an explanation. Janice cried and said, "I'm so sorry, I don't know why I did it." She understood that because of this, she would lose her parents' trust and might even be kicked out of the house. Although the Magwads felt deeply hurt, they tried to understand Janice. They believed that since she had lacked affection from a young age, she didn't have the same sense of security as Gwen and Louis. Therefore, Janice's actions likely stemmed from a psychology of deprivation, as she had once worried about where her next meal would come from. So the Magad family forgave Janice because she was now their child. They felt she needed more love and understanding. They wanted Janice to know that as long as she was part of this family, she would never have to worry about money again. However, on December 10th, everything fell apart completely. When Cruz received the call about the horrific incident, Alala rushed home, embracing her husband and adopted daughter, sobbing outside the house. Meanwhile, the police were busy collecting evidence inside. They then interrogated Janice. The only surviving witness, she stated that she and Gwyn were in their room while Lewis was in the living room. Suddenly, they heard Lewis scream along with the sound of objects breaking, so they immediately ran out to see what was happening. They saw 3 strangers suddenly appear in the living room. 2 of them were beating Lewis with a hammer and a baseball bat, while the third stabbed him with a knife when they spotted Gwyn and Janice. They rushed towards them and caught Gwyn taking advantage of her sister's struggle. Janice ran into the room and hid under the bed. During this time, she sent a distress message to the family chat group and posted a plea for help on social media. Janice also recounted that although the robbers later came into the room to look for her, they fortunately didn't discover her hiding under the bed. This case puzzled the Philippine police. Despite abundant evidence at the scene, they still couldn't understand the full sequence of events. First, the front door was locked from the inside and showed no signs of forced entry. Second, nothing in the house was missing, which clearly didn't fit the scenario of a robbery. Homicide. Upon inspection, the police found that Janice's bed was clearly visible upon entering the room, so if the robbers had really entered, they couldn't have missed seeing her by December 13th when the autopsy results came in. The case became even more perplexing. Both victims had died from excessive blood loss, but before being stabbed to death, they had endured extremely brutal beatings. Gwyn, in particular, had her face cut with a knife. To the point of being unrecognizable, experts suggested that this behavior usually stems from jealousy or hatred. As for Lewis, he had been stabbed 51 times. If this was really the act of robbers, why would they be so brutal to 2 children? These wounds seem more like an act of venting anger than covering up evidence. Moreover, according to further investigation, Gwyn had been killed before Lewis, which clearly didn't match Janice's testimony. Additionally, forensic doctors determined that the siblings were murdered around 2 p.m., while the time Janice posted her plea for help was at 2:48 p.m. Furthermore, Janice's distress message also seemed odd in such a dire situation. She still remembered to add emojis to her message, which was very strange. Not only that, but the presence of the murder weapons at the scene was also illogical. The hammer and baseball bat were actually belongings of the Magad family. The hammer was Cruz's tool for repairing things, and he usually kept it in a drawer in the laundry room. He was certain that only Janice and he knew where the hammer was kept. The baseball bat belonged to Lewis, and it was usually kept on the top bunk in his bedroom, which was now Janice's room. Typically, burglars who break into homes bring their own weapons or use easily visible objects as weapons, but these 2 items were clearly not something that strangers could easily find on their first visit to the house immediately after the incident. Janice posted a memorial for Gwyn and Lewis on social media, which quickly received much sympathy. However, shocking discoveries were made shortly after. When investigating her social media accounts, it turned out that Janice wasn't an orphan, and she had even been in contact with her birth mother through social media over the years. Many years ago, after her parents divorced, her father left their 5 children in the mother's care. In difficult circumstances, her mother was forced to let the children fend for themselves after entering the orphanage. Janice went through many hardships before finally being adopted by the Magad family. Her birth mother was aware of this. At the time, this information quickly reached the Magwads. However, as the police were still investigating the case, they maintained a polite and compassionate attitude, imploring people not to make malicious speculations since Janice was still under 18. While rumors were spreading, the police also expanded their investigation soon after they discovered a bag of blood-soaked women's clothes carefully wrapped in the drainage of the stream behind the Magad house. The bloodstains on the clothes were confirmed to be from Gwyn and Lewis, while the clothes belonged to Janice. The final breakthrough in the case was discovered by Ella after losing her 2 children. Ella was in extreme pain. To control her sadness and avoid breaking down, she tried to keep herself busy by meticulously cleaning the entire house. While cleaning Janice's room, LVLL discovered a strange ID card and immediately turned it over to the police. It was the ID of a 17-year-old teenager named Marlon. Although Lele had never met this teenager, her neighbors had seen him. Many witnesses stated that they had seen Marlon heading towards the Magad house on the day of the incident. A store owner even confirmed that Marlon had come into his store and asked which house belonged to the Magad family. Another motorcycle driver also reported that he had given Marlon a ride there. Faced with this crucial evidence, the police immediately interrogated Janice under pressure. She admitted to knowing Marlon. He was a friend she had met while working at the church in the presence of a lawyer. Janice also confessed that she and Marlon were responsible for killing Gwyn and Lewis. The police immediately arrested Marlon and Janice. Moreover, they found Gwyn's phone in his backpack. Although Marlon and Janice were arrested, their motive remained a mystery during questioning. Marlon stated that on the day of the incident, he saw his girlfriend's plea for help on social media. He immediately called Janice, but when the call connected, there was only silence on the other end. After a few seconds of silence, he hung up, assuming it might be a joke from his girlfriend. This explanation seems strange. Either the man was incredibly insensitive or he was too accustomed to such dramatic acts from his girlfriend. Otherwise, it's hard to understand how someone could see such a post and not be concerned, especially from their own girlfriend. During interrogation, Janice admitted she was very jealous of Gwyn. Gwyn was both smart and beautiful and had been loved by many since childhood, while Janice had nothing. Perhaps on the very morning of the incident, when Janice first called the Magwoods' mom and dad, she decided she would become their only child and monopolize their love. Later, police found messages on Janice's phone sent to Marlon after her adoption, stating she wanted to kill 7 people, though she didn't specify who these 7 were. On December 16, 2021, Janice and Marlon were placed in a juvenile detention center. The case entered a prolonged trial phase. During this time, the Magwads held a funeral for their 2 unfortunate children. Surprisingly, Janice's birth mother appeared at the funeral. She knelt before the Magwoods to apologize for her daughter's actions. By May 2022, Janice was sentenced to 32 years in prison for premeditated murder, while Marlon received a 29-year sentence, both without possibility of parole. However, as they were both minors, they would officially begin serving their sentences at age 21. This verdict outraged the Magwoods and many Filipino citizens. In fact, Ella had once considered forgiving Janice due to her religious beliefs, but during her detention, Janice showed no signs of remorse or regret. Many people believed that the negligence of Janice's birth parents and social welfare agencies had turned her into a monster, ultimately causing tragedy for the Magad family. After Gwyn and Lewis's deaths, the Magwoods frequently visited their children's graves on holidays and anniversaries. Olia soon returned to school to continue her educational work. In August 2022, Cruz opened a restaurant serving Gwyn and Lewis's favorite dishes to honor their memory story. 2. The case takes place on the southwest side of Hong Kong Island. Here lies a small island named Aberdeen, which covers only 0.5 square miles, but is home to 90,000 people. The main character in this story is a 25-year-old woman named Yu, who worked as an accountant. She was a great communicator with many friends. At one point, she had her romantic fortune read online, which indicated that her love life was flourishing. However, a master later warned her, "You need to exercise restraint. If you're not careful, you could face deadly consequences." Unfortunately, this ominous prediction came true in a horrifying way. So, what exactly happened? Let's rewind to October 27th, 2010. It was a Wednesday, and around 8:30 a.m., some people were fishing along the coast of Aberdeen. The morning sun was shining brightly, the sea breeze gently blew across the sand, and the ocean sparkled like silver. However, in stark contrast to this idyllic scene near the trash dump on Lennon Road, the fishermen noticed something unusual floating in the water. Curious, they sat down their fishing rods and walked closer to investigate. What they found was shocking. The partially clothed body of a woman drifting in the water. After regaining their composure, they immediately called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene and brought the victim's body to shore. The victim was a woman approximately 5 feet, 3 and around 25 years old. She was found face down with her back facing the sky. She was wearing a gray top, but nothing below the waist. There were some injuries on her hands and neck. Though they weren't severe, it appeared that she might have collided with some rocks while drifting in the sea. That evening, news outlets reported on the incident, and the following day, several people came forward to identify the body. The police confirmed the victim's identity as 25-year-old Yu. The day before, her parents had received a call from her co-workers asking why she hadn't shown up for work, confused. They mentioned that their daughter hadn't slept at home the previous night, but had called to let them know throughout the day they tried unsuccessfully to contact her. It wasn't until that evening when they saw the news on TV that they were horrified to recognize the body found at Aberdeen as their daughter. It was then they suspected something terrible had happened to her since the victim had recently passed away. Her face was only slightly swollen and deformed, along with a small pox vaccination scar on her arm. Her parents were certain it was their daughter. According to the investigation, Yu was born in 1985 in Huzhou, China. At 12 years old, she moved to Hong Kong with her family. She was the eldest of 5 siblings, and the entire family of 7 lived together in Kwaichong. Hong Kong, Yu graduated with a degree in tourism from the Hong Kong Institute of Vocational Education. After graduation, she changed jobs multiple times over the course of 3 years. Before her death, she worked as an accountant at a company in Shanghai and was considering a job change. Yu was beautiful and had many admirers, but none of her relationships lasted long, mostly involving co-workers she met through work. Her close friend Jenny mentioned Yu always caught everyone's attention. Many guys were infatuated with her. However, she had a strong desire to marry a foreigner and settle abroad, so she paid special attention to foreign men. She frequently visited La Kwang, a popular area for bars, and continuously searched for a suitable boyfriend. In February 2010, Yu met a German colleague named Thomas. They quickly became romantically involved, and after just 2 months of dating, she introduced him to her parents. She even made their relationship public on social media, writing it like, "I love you" in German on her profile to express her feelings for him. Thomas also vowed, "I will take you to Germany to live with me." However, Thomas was later transferred to Beijing for work, and their relationship ended. Yu's dream of moving abroad seemed within reach, but it ultimately fell apart. Devastated and desperate, she sought guidance from a master fortune teller. The master predicted you have a strong romantic fortune, but I advise you to remain virtuous if you continue to live recklessly. At best, you'll lose everything, and at worst, you could face deadly consequences. Since then, who you followed the master's advice and started to make changes previously. She would often go out drinking with male friends until late at night and let them take her home. But after listening to the master, she began to go out drinking alone and took a taxi home by herself. However, these changes were not enough to save her, according to Yu's parents on the afternoon of October 26th. After finishing work, their daughter came home as usual and spent some time chatting online with friends. Suddenly, she stopped talking and hurried out. Later, they received a call from her saying she was going to have drinks with friends in La Kwang and told them not to worry. Little did they know the next time they would see their daughter, she would be a lifeless body. Yu's parents were devastated. They provided the police with some clues, although she had broken up with her German boyfriend, Thomas. In July of that year, Thomas returned to Hong Kong and the two rekindled their relationship even after Thomas went back to Beijing. Yu continued to stay in touch with him. Occasionally calling each other, she once complained to her parents about the high phone bills, but from her words, it was clear she still had hope for a future with Thomas. Therefore, the possibility that Yu had intentionally jumped into the sea could be ruled out moreover when she left home. Yu was wearing tight jeans and a loose top. However, when her body was found, the jeans were missing. Typically, a loose top would be more likely to be swept away by the water. Her home was in Kuching. To get from Lan Kwang to Kuching, you would head north, but the sea at Aberdeen, where her body was found, is located south-south of Lan Kwu Fong, about 6 miles away by car. According to Jenny, Yu had an ex-boyfriend named Ify who worked as a manager at a convenience store during the investigation. IFA stated that he had worked the night shifts on October 25th and 26th. The police confirmed that he was been acting strangely, almost like he was losing his mind. The police immediately brought Fai in for questioning. He admitted that he still had lingering feelings for Yu. When they checked his phone records, the police discovered that he had arranged to meet Yu on the nights of October 25th and 26th on the first night. Yu did not show up at the meeting spot. The following night, he also didn't see her, so he ended up hanging out with friends until the next morning. Our Fai's friends confirmed this to the police after ruling out a FI as a suspect. The police shifted their focus to the victim's German boyfriend Thomas, as the victim's parents had mentioned Thomas and Yu had broken up once during the 2010 World Cup. After that, Thomas returned to Hong Kong and they got back together when the World Cup ended in August. Thomas returned to Beijing for work, leaving Yu behind in Hong Kong. Despite this, she continued to miss her German boyfriend deeply, not only spending a lot on long-distance calls, but also saving up to visit him in Beijing. However, on the day of the crime time, Thomas was not in Hong Kong, so he could not have been the perpetrator. The police went to Yu's H to collect personal items, including her computer. Based on the clues gathered over the next 2 days, the police interviewed nearly 50 people, mostly men, to gather statements. A restaurant worker who had worked with Yu was shocked and saddened to hear of her death. He admitted that while they worked together, he developed feelings for Yu and tried to pursue her, but his efforts were unsuccessful. I'll mention that even though he only worked with her for 3 months before leaving Yu's cheerful and friendly personality made her well-liked by everyone at the restaurant. 3 days after the incident, the forensic report was released. The victim had stiff limbs, froth around her mouth, and swollen lungs filled with water, indicating that she was still breathing when submerged. Small blood spots on her eyelids suggested that she had been strangled while still alive. This meant that her heart was still beating when she was thrown into the sea and she lay drowned. The time of death was estimated to be between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. About an hour before the fishermen discovered her, the police deployed a search team along the Ain coastline to look for Yu's belongings, but they found nothing. They suspected that Yu had been murdered elsewhere, and her body was then dumped into the sea at Ain's waterfront. Among the 50 people interviewed, one man caught the attention of the police. His name was Wen Jen Kong, 43 years old, standing 5 feet 10 inches with a muscular build. He had passed the police academy entrance exam and later became a patrol officer. Everyone thought his life would go smoothly from there, but in his 7th year on the force, he was accused of attempting to assault a colleague's girlfriend. Another source revealed that he was arrested for taking nude photos to blackmail someone. Whatever the reason, when Jen Kong was dismissed from the force and served 10 months in prison after his release due to his criminal record, he struggled to find a decent job and was forced to work as a taxi driver. At that time, driving a taxi in Hong Kong was a well-paying job, earning about 10,000 Hong Kong dollars per month, roughly $1,300. However, when Janong was not content with this, he was fined twice for driving, while his license was suspended to increase his income. When Jen Kong adapted to the trend of providing ride-hailing services, Yu was one of his regular customers. The reason the police suspected Wen Jen Kong was because the last call Yu made was to him between October 26th and 28th. He called and texted Yu a total of 4 times. When the police reviewed surveillance footage near the trash dump on Linen Road, they spotted a taxi in the area after checking the license plate. They confirmed that when Jen Kong was the driver, the police summoned him for questioning. When Jen Kong appeared very distraught, crying and saying that he hadn't been able to reach Yu for several days and was extremely worried about her. He claimed he never imagined he would never see her again when the police asked where he was on the night of October 26th, when Jen Kong stated that he was picking up passengers near Hong Kong. However, this explanation only increased the police's suspicion, as Hong Kong and Aberdeen are on opposite sides of a strait, making it entirely possible for Wen Jen Kong to have committed the crime. Realizing he had possibly misspoken, when Jen Kong then claimed that Yu had called him that night to tell him not to pick her up. However, this explain only made him seem more suspicious as expected when the police searched. When Jen Kong's taxi, they found bloodstains inside the vehicle when Jen Kong explained that he transported dozens of passengers every day and suggested that one of them, possibly a woman on her period, might have accidentally left the stain. Additionally, a piece of fabric was found in the trunk, which could have come from the coat Yu was wearing. However, since the coat was missing, they couldn't verify this immediately. Further investigation revealed that in early October, Yu had gone shopping with the friend had liked a coat but couldn't find it in her size, so Yu ended up buying it herself. The police tracked down the manufacturer of the coat and obtained an identical one for comparison. The fabric fibers on the coat matched those found in the trunk of when Jen Kong's taxi. DNA testing also confirmed that the blood in the taxi was Yu's, combined with the surveillance footage from the camera near the Lean Nan Road trash dump. The police now had enough evidence to arrest W. Jen Kong. 5 days after the crime, the police found W. Jen Kong at a tea house in Kowon. He was hooded, handcuffed, and escorted to the police station, confronted with overwhelming evidence when Jen Kong could no longer deny his actions. He confessed to the crime and revealed the entire story. It turned out that despite their 18-year AG difference, there was a connection between this taxi driver and Yu. 1 year earlier, on a night in November 2009, when Jen Kong met Yu for the first time that evening, Yu had been out drinking in LQ Fong and, as usual, took a taxi home by fate. The taxi driver that night happened to be when Jen Kong Yu got into the passenger seat, and because she was dressed quite provocatively, wearing a strong perfume mixed with the scent of alcohol, when Janong couldn't take his eyes off her. Her beautiful appearance and awe-inspiring figure captivated him. Yu, being an open and friendly person, started chatting with W. Jen Kong. As soon as she got into the car, she mentioned that she often went out drinking in Lan Kwang at night and almost always needed a taxi to get home in the early morning. Hearing this, when Jen Kong offered to pick her up regularly, to his surprise, Yu happily agreed. They exchanged contact information, and over the next 3 months, when Jen Kong became Yu's personal driver, they grew closer and their relationship became more intimate. Initially, Yu half-jokingly asked Wen Jinong if he could give her a discount on the taxi fare. Unexpectedly, he agreed immediately. By February 2010. They were no longer just a driver and a passenger, but a couple. Dating when Jen Kong admitted that he had fallen in love with Yu. At first sight, he started driving her to work for free, paying for their meals whenever they went out, and occasionally buying her gifts. Even though he wasn't financially well off, when Jen Kong was willing to spend money on Yu out of love. When he ran out of money, he borrowed from friends. Coincidentally, Yu met her German boyfriend Thomas in February as well. From that point on, she began maintaining relationships with both men. When Janong was aware that Yu had a boyfriend, he understood that he was just a taxi driver with limited financial resources and a narrow social circle, nowhere near as well off as her official boyfriend. Despite this, he still hoped that she would choose him by July of that year. During the World Cup, Yu borrowed 10,000 Hong Kong dollars from W. Jen Kong to buy household items. Seizing the opportunity when Jen Kong suggested that they have a weekly heart-to-heart talk, to his surprise, Yu agreed. Overjoyed, he immediately transferred the money to her bank account. Their relationship grew increasingly intimate. From then on, they would meet each week at secluded spots like in Repulse Bay for their secret encounters. They even created a code-name mailbox to refer to their meetings in the car. After each encounter, Yu would typically receive 500 or 1,000 Hong Kong dollars from when Jen Kong. This ambiguous, undefined relationship continued for 3 months. During this time, Yu frequently asked Wen John Kong for money, citing various reasons. When Jen Kong became more deeply entangled in this affair, pouring more and more money into Yu, even believing that she might eventually leave her German boyfriend for him. However, in reality, Yu was quietly saving up this money to prepare for her future life in Germany. As time passed on, October 26th, Yu once again invited Wen Jinong for an encounter that evening. After picking her up from Lan Ku Fong, when Jinong drove to the entrance of a cemetery near Ti Sing Cha village. The place was deserted and quiet. There was no one else around. They were pleased with the location and began their usual activities. Unexpectedly, in this remote area, there were occasional passers-by. Suddenly, a car approached, startling them. They quickly stopped what they were doing and sat talking in the car. They hadn't even put their clothes back on when Yu mentioned that her boyfriend Thomas would be returning to Hong Kong on November 1st. She smiled excitedly, talking about her bright future with Thomas, completely oblivious to when Jen Kong's feelings at this point, already frustrated by the car that interrupted them, and now hearing that Yu was planning to leave Hong Kong when Jen Kong felt extremely irritated and uneasy. However, the worst was yet to come. Yu's next statement pushed him over the edge. She said this will be the last time we're together to avoid being caught cheating by her boyfriend. She needed to end a relationship with Wen Kong, however, she still had some debt at the bank and didn't want Thomas to find out about it. So she asked Wen Jen Kong to lend her an additional 10,000 Hong Kong dollars as a breakup fee upon hearing this. Wen Jen Kong angrily responded, "I've treated you so well, I'm deep in debt because of you, and this is how you repay me." The two argued fiercely in the car, and the confrontation quickly escalated. Taking advantage of the fact that they were both undressed, Yu elbowed Wen Jen Kong hard in the groin, struck in a sensitive area when Jen Kong was in pain. Furious and began losing control, he flew into a rage, assaulted her, and then used both hands to strangle Yu for 2 minutes until she lost. Consciousness panicked when Jen Kong believed he had killed her, but in reality, Yu was still alive. At that moment, in his frantic state, he threw her underwear, jeans, and blue canvas shoes into the roadside bushes, then carried her body to the trunk of his car and drove to the seaside near the trash dump on Linen Road in Aberdeen around 9 p.m. He arrived but had to wait because there were many people fishing and filming in the area. It wasn't until 2:30 a.m. when the place was deserted that he finally dumped Yu's body into the sea. What's noteworthy is that if this timeline is accurate, Yu regained consciousness after being thrown into the sea and struggled for several hours after committing the crime when Jen Kong used his experience as a former patrol officer to mislead the investigation. He repeatedly called and texted Yu, asking where she was in an attempt to create an alibi according to the crime scene reconstruction. After Wen Jen Kong's arrest, he walked along a trail to the pier where he threw Yu's body and her light blue handbag into the sea. The disposal site was only about 100 meters from where the VI victim's clothes were found. The police were puzzled because the trash dump on Linen Road, Aberdeen, and the cemetery near Takeno Village were 27 kilometers apart, taking nearly 40 minutes to drive between. So why didn't Wen Jen Kong dispose of the body at the cemetery and instead drive to such a distant location when Jen Kong explained that he was in a state of panic and his mind was blank at the time, having served as a patrol officer stationed at the Hong Kong Marine Police Headquarters? He was quite familiar with the area. Additionally, he knew the procedures and methods the Marine Police would use to handle such cases, and could even gather information from former colleagues, which led him to drive to this location on November 2nd, under Wen Jen Kong's guidance. The police arrived at the disposal site. Sure enough, they found Yu clothes in the bushes. It then took the police an additional 3 hours to reconstruct the crime scene. Yu's parents were utterly shocked when they learned that the suspect had been arrested. They pointed at W. Jen Kong and said, "Isn't that the man from the other day?" It turned out that on the second day after the crime, when Jen Kong had proactively called Yu's parents, introducing himself as a taxi driver, and also a friend of Yu's, saying that he was looking for her, he even went as far as driving Yu's parents to the morgue to identify their daughter's body. Yu's parents were deeply moved, thinking there was someone who cared about their daughter. In an interview with reporters, they expressed how terrified they felt when they realized they had been sitting in the car of the man who murdered their daughter in the hearts of Yu's parents. Their daughter was a dutiful and caring child who had never given them any reason to worry. She always took care of her younger siblings without needing to be asked. The pain of losing her was overwhelming, and they could not find solace in their grief. Yu's younger sister wept silently as she packed away her sister's belongings on November 3rd. The Hong Kong Public Prosecutor's Office formally charged Wen J. Kong. The date coincided with Yu's burial, 6 months after the incident in April 2012, when Jen Kong's trial took place at the Hong Kong East Magistrates Court. He was charged with murder during the trial. When Zhenong learned that Yu Au was still alive when he threw her into the sea, he expressed remorse and cried out in court, stating that it was the greatest regret of his life. However, when Jen Kong did not plead guilty to murder, only to manslaughter, the prosecutor argued that when Jen Kong was not acting out of sudden anger but was fully aware that Yui was still alive when he threw her into the sea, when Jen Kong vehemently denied this, insisting that he believed Yui was already dead, which is why he disposed of her body in the sea. He claimed that if he had known she was still breathing, he would never have done it. When Jen Kong's lawyer argued that he had lent money to Yui multiple times and that they had numerous financial transactions between them. Even though Yu had a boyfriend, she continued to maintain an ambiguous relationship with Wen Jen Kong, making her partly responsible for what happened. However, only when Jen Kong and Yu knew what truly occurred that night, and now that Yu was dead when Jen Kong's testimony could not be fully verified, after 8 days of trial, the jury unanimously found Wen Jen Kong guilty of murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment. When Jen Kong's fate was sealed after nearly 3 years, he finally had to pay for his heinous crime. The rest of J. Kong's life will be spent behind bars. However, not many people believed Wen Jen Kong's testimony. Aside from the fact that Yu could no longer testify, Wen Jen Kong's previous reputation also cast doubt on his claims. His prior dismissal from the police force for misconduct, including attempts to exploit or blackmail with explicit photos, left him widely despised after murdering Yu Aoyu. He feigned concern by calling her parents while simultaneously disposing of her body in attempting to fabricate an alibi. Such actions painted him as deceitful and ruthless. There were even rumors that when Jen Kong frequently picked up passengers in the Lan Kuang area, exploiting intoxicated women by taking them home and assaulting them when Janong was far from the innocent person he claimed to be. In this case, it took less than a week from the discovery of the body to the capture of the suspect. The swift and effective investigation by the Hong Kong police was widely acknowledged by the public. Later, the senior inspector in charge of the investigation stated that the court's verdict accurately reflected the truth and the police's efforts. He believed that anyone could see that when Jen Kong's testimony and evidence lacked credibility, the Yu case has come to a close, leaving her family in deep sorrow and serving as a sobering lesson for everyone. When Jen Kong must now pay for his crime behind the bars of a prison, facing the torment of his conscience every day. As for Yu, the young woman with dreams of a better life, she tragically lost her life due to her own mistakes. Perhaps if Yu had been content with her life, appreciated the genuine love of those around her, and resisted the temptations of wealth and status, this tragedy could have been avoided. This story also serves as a warning to young women who are enamored with materialism, willing to compromise themselves for a life of luxury. True happiness doesn't come from wealth or fame, but from sincere love and wise choices. The Yu case is like an indelible scar, leaving behind pain and a valuable lesson for all of us. Story 3, what could be more heartbreaking than witnessing your loved ones die one by one due to illness or accidents? But perhaps it is even more heart-wrenching and enraging when they are murdered. For no apparent reason, the perpetrator uses such cunning tactics and hides so well. The pain is magnified when facing the fact that the murderer is still at large. In this context, the anger and desire for justice become the sole motivation for the victim's family to continue fighting. They not only seek answers, but also want the perpetrator to pay for their crimes, for justice to be served, and for the departed to rest in peace. Every clue, every piece of evidence, no matter how small, becomes a fragile hope in this arduous journey. However, the situation is not that simple. Today's case is the tragedy of a family where 3 people were murdered in one night, leaving a man to witness the loss of his wife and 2 young daughters in a state of fury. Was the perpetrator someone with a deep grudge against this family, or were they simply a thief? Some even believe the killer might be a psychopath who took the lives of a mother and her 2 children just to make a mark. The truth behind these deaths awaits your discovery on April 20th of 2006. A heartbreaking murder case occurred in Lingo County, Haiyan Province, China. A mother and her 2 children died of asphyxiation. The incident was discovered by Zhang Jihan, 35, the husband and father of the victims, at 6 a.m. When he returned home after a night's shift. Upon entering the house, Zhang Jian sensed something was wrong. The house was eerily silent, with no sounds coming from the kitchen or living room. He called out to his wife and children but received no response. His heart raced, filled with a sense of dread. Jung Jahan quickly ran to the bedroom. The scene that greeted him was shocking. His wife lay motionless on the bed, her face pale and lifeless. His 2 young daughters were also there, motionless and cold. Jung Jahan felt his world collapse, unable to believe his eyes. He rushed to the bed, shaking his wife and children, trying to wake them, but all efforts were in vain. He called the police in a panic, his voice trembling and broken upon receiving Young John's call. The police quickly arrived at the victim's house. The main bedroom where the crime occurred was filled with the smell of diethyl ether. Ether used as an anesthetic has a distinctive odor. This smell can linger on the victims' mouths and noses. After exposure, it's easily recognizable, similar to the smell of alcohol or other volatile liquids. Sensitive individuals like the police can easily detect it if the victims were anesthetized with ether. The smell would likely remain on their bodies, especially around the mouth and nose on the bed. The wife's body lay with a swollen face. Bruises appeared, her lips turned dark purple, her eyes wide open, and dried blood marked her mouth and nose. Red marks on her neck suggested the mere murder's hand or the edge of a pillow pressing against her face. Her hands were clenched, indicating a desperate struggle. Before losing consciousness, beside the body, the pillow had bloodstains and clear handprints indicating a fierce struggle. The strong smell of ether lingered in the air, hinting that the victim was anesthetized before being killed. The body lay in a rigid position, one arm twisted under her, showcasing her helplessness. In the final moments, the pillow beside the wife's body had blood and handprints. The bloodstains weren't just on the surface, but soaked into the fabric. Showing significant force was used. The pillow's edges had small tears and rough patches with indents. Especially in the middle strands of the victim's hair were caught, and the pillow police found small fabric fibers from the pillow on the victim's face and neck, indicating it was used to smother her. This pillow, an otherwise harmless household item, became a murder weapon in the hands of the killer in the same room. The elder daughter's body lay on the floor, eyes wide open. Marks on her face and neck indicated a fierce struggle. Her body also showed bruises, signs of being restrained and killed. The younger daughter was found nearby. Her body lay curled up on the floor, surrounded by bloodstains and chaotic footprints. Bruises on her neck and face indicated she too was brutally killed. The autopsy results of all 3 victims showed that the cause of death was asphyxiation on the wife's body. Traces of ether were found around her nose and mouth, affirming that she was anesthetized before being killed. The older daughter had evidence of being smothered by hand, along with bruises and mechanical injuries around her neck. The youngest daughter's body showed similar injuries with signs of asphyxiation and bruising, especially around her neck and face. Additionally, the pillow contained DNA from all 3 victims. The examination also revealed that all 3 were killed within a short time frame, indicating that the perpetrator acted decisively and gave the victims no chance to call for help or escape. Based on the evidence collected, it can be inferred that the killer approached the victims while they were in a deep sleep. He used a cloth soaked in ether to cover the victim's nose, causing her to temporarily lose consciousness. He then used a pillow to press down on her face, leading to asphyxiation. The pillow was pressed down with great force, as shown by the deep imprints and bloodstains soaked into the fabric. The handprints on the pillow indicated that the killer used both hands to apply pressure, ensuring the victim could not breathe. However, the perpetrator did not leave his own fingerprints on the pillow. Using a pillow allowed the killer to murder quickly and effectively, while also muffling the victim's cries for help. Preventing nearby people from noticing, this was a calculated and ruthless act. Showcasing the perpetrator's determination and cold-blooded nature, the use of ether for anesthesia also showed that the killer was well prepared. The murder of all 3 victims in a short time and in such a brutal manner suggests that the perpetrator not only had a strong motive, but also the ability to control the situation without succumbing to psychological pressure. The killer had a clear plan and acted decisively. leaving no chance for any victim to survive the signs of violence and struggle on the victims' bodies. Particularly, the pillow marks and bruises indicate that the victims fought back fiercely. The killer used physical strength to overpower them, suggesting he might have been physically superior or had an advantage over. Outside Zhang Zan's house, additionally, a hair sample found at the crime scene matched Mr. Li's DNA. Despite his denial of being at the Zhang house on July, the night of the murder, initially the evidence pointed to Mr. Li's involvement. However, during interrogation, he continually asserted his innocence. Mr. Li claimed that on the night of the murder he was at home and did not leave all evening with his wife. As his alibi, he insisted he had no reason to harm his friend's family and that the arguments between Zhang Zihan and his wife were minor and not worth resorting to violence. He explained that his hair was at the scene because he often visited Zhang Zan's house and it could have fallen during previous visits. Regarding the surveillance footage, Mr. Li asserted that it was not him, possibly a mistake, or someone with a similar build. He emphasized that despite his past with domestic violence, over 3 years ago he had made efforts to change and live a normal, non-violent life. Upon closer examination of the surveillance footage, the police realized that the man was not Mr. Li, but a neighbor with a similar build. This neighbor confirmed that he often walked around the neighborhood at night, due to insima fact well known among the local residents. The hair sample initially matched with Mr. Li's DNA was re-examined upon closer inspection. The police discovered that the hair was not new but likely shed during Mr. Li's previous visits to the house, making its presence at the scene unsurprising. With this information, the police concluded that Mr. Li was innocent, and the initial evidence was either coincidental or an attempt by someone to frame him. However, during Mr. Li's interrogation, the police learned about another potential suspect. Mrs. Wang, 40, a neighbor who had personal conflicts with Jiang Minggu over land disputes. Mrs. Wang was the only one who reported seeing a strange man entering and leaving the Jiang house on the night of the murder. However, her statement had several inconsistencies. The police also found incriminating evidence against Mrs. Wang. A piece of the ether-soaked cloth was discovered in her trash, and blood from one of the children was found on her window when questioned. Mrs. W. couldn't explain how these items ended up there. She had a history of mental illness and had previously exhibited violent behavior to uncover the truth. The police decided to interrogate Mrs. Wang more thoroughly during the interrogation. Mrs. Wang appeared confused and couldn't provide a coherent explanation for the evidence. She admitted to having personal conflicts with Jiang Minggu over land, but insisted this was not a motive for her to act violently. An important detail uncovered was Mrs. Wang's treatment for mental illness at a local hospital. Her medical records indicated she had paranoid tendencies and might imagine scenarios that didn't exist. Doctors explained this could account for her inconsistent statements about seeing a strange man at the Jiang house. However, the ether-soaked cloth and blood on her window were undeniable pieces of evidence. Despite her mental instability, these findings seemed to implicate her. The police suspected that her illness might have led to uncontrolled actions. However, some officers believed the real culprit might be using her mental state and history to set her up. Ultimately, the police couldn't conclusively determine Mrs. Wang's guilt. Due to conflicting opinions, they continued to investigate other suspects and search for new leads to identify the true perpetrator or find more concrete evidence against Mrs. Wang. Meanwhile, they placed Mrs. Wang under special surveillance to ensure she didn't pose further danger and provided her with psychological support. As needed, the final suspect on the list was the Jiang family's former housekeeper, Mrs. Lu. 35, she had worked for the Jiang family and was trusted by them. However, she was abruptly fired for unclear reasons. Rumors quickly spread that she had a romantic relationship with Zhang Zhan, leading to her dismissal by Jiang Minggu. Mrs. Lu expressed anger and a sense of injustice to her friends. After being fired, she felt wronged and didn't deserve such treatment. The conflict didn't end with her dismissal. Mrs. Lu felt humiliated by gossip and judgment from neighbors. Moreover, her animosity towards Zhang Mua deepened when Zhang refused to pay her remaining wages and bonuses. This financial strain forced Mrs. Lu to borrow money to meet daily needs, adding to her psychological and financial pressure, possibly leading to negative behavior and thoughts. Although these conflicts didn't seem severe enough to drive someone to murder, an old phone belonging to Mrs. Lu was found at the scene. It contained numerous threatening messages from Zhang Zhan's wife. Additionally, the police discovered an unexplained deposit in Mrs. Liu's bank account shortly after the murder. However, thorough investigation revealed her innocence. The old phone with threatening messages found near the scene had been stolen from Mrs. Liu weeks earlier, which she didn't report. Considering it a minor loss, this was confirmed when police matched the phone's disappearance with the timing of the threatening messages, indicating someone else used her phone to send them after thoroughly examining the network records. The police discovered that the threatening messages sent to Yang Mua were sent from various locations that did not match Mrs. L's whereabouts. At those times, Mrs. L also provided evidence showing she was at different places when the messages were sent, including receipts and witness statements confirming her presence at locations far from the Jiang household. Furthermore, when comparing the timeline of the phone's loss with the messages, the police realized that the first threatening messages only appeared after Mrs. Liu had informed friends and family about losing her phone. The large, unusual sum of money in Mrs. Liu's bank account was also investigated. The police found that this money came from a bank loan Mrs. Liu had applied for before the murder to cover living expenses, and debt-related documents, including the loan agreement and payment receipts, were verified by the bank, ruling out any connection to the murder. After analyzing all the evidence, the police concluded that Mrs. Liu had neither the motive nor the opportunity to commit the crime. While there were conflicts between her and the Jiang family, they were not enough to make her a ruthless murderer. The truth about the threatening messages on Mrs. L's phone partially proved her innocence and indicated that the real culprit was still at large. The perpetrator might have been using Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Wang as scapegoats. After being exonerated, Mrs. Liu agreed to cooperate with the police and provide a detailed testimony about what she knew in her statement. Mrs. Liu recounted suspicious events involving Jiang Ziyan, who the police had initially ruled out because he had an alibi confirmed by co-workers that he was at work the night of the murders and returned home in the morning. Mrs. Liu recalled witnessing several intense arguments between Jiang Ziyan and his wife. Before she was fired, their relationship was complicated, while they appeared harmonious outwardly. Those close to them knew there were underlying tensions. Jiang Zan was a quiet, reserved man who was often absent. Due to work, however, during his rare moments at home, he often argued with Yang Mua about parenting and important family decisions. Despite this, Jiang Mua tried to maintain stability and harmony in the family for the sake of their daughters, who often witnessed their parents' arguments on the surface. The Jiang family seemed normal and happy. However, deeper investigation revealed unusual signs in their relationships. This information became crucial in the police's effort to uncover the truth behind Jiang Mua and her daughter's deaths. They began to delve deeper into Jiang Ziyan and his recent activities. A significant event occurred the day before the murders. Jiang Zan's co-worker, Mrs. Mu, happened to see him near Mrs. L's neighborhood. Her house was on a route she frequently traveled, so she noticed him but didn't find it suspicious at the time. Only after hearing about the police investigating Mrs. Liu did Mrs. Mu remember the sighting. Hoping it might aid the case, the police scrutinized security cameras around Mrs. Liu's neighborhood and found footage of Jiang Zehan lingering near her house on the night she reported her phone missing. This raised strong suspicion that Jiang Zehan might have stolen Mrs. Liu's phone to execute his plan. Continuing the investigation, the police collected network records showing that the threatening messages to Jiang Mua were sent from locations near Jiang Zan's workplace, further implicating him as the one using Mrs. Liu's phone on April 25th. Jiang Zehan was summoned to the police station to confront the new evidence. During interrogation, he vehemently denied all accusation, maintaining his innocence and claiming no involvement in the murders. He explained his presence near Mrs. Liu's house as a coincidence, citing a personal errand in the area unrelated to stealing her phone or sending threatening messages. However, when presented with network records showing the messages were sent from near his workplace, Jiang Ziyan had no plausible defense. Additionally, police had investigated his alibi, discovering that his co-worker who confirmed his presence at the company the night of the murders had been bribed to provide false testimony. In reality, Jiang Ziyan left the company around 10 p.m. and returned around 4 a.m. Finally, after cross-referencing all evidence and gathered information, the police concluded that Jiang Zehan orchestrated the entire crime. He meticulously planned the murders, created a false alibi, and framed Mrs. Lau by stealing her phone to send threatening messages to Jiang Minghua. Deceiving the police at the police station, Jiang Ziyan confessed the whole truth to live openly. With his mistress, this unfaithful husband ruthlessly murdered his wife and 2 daughters. The motive for the crime stemmed from his extramarital relationship with a woman named Sue, 29. About 3 years before the crime, Jiang Zan and Mrs. Sue were merely colleagues. However, over time they became attracted to each other and their relationship gradually developed into a romantic one. During this period, Jiang Zan's relationship with Jiang Menhua had significantly deteriorated. They constantly argued about financial issues, parenting, and other important family decisions. This discord left Jiang Zehan feeling exhausted and hopeless. This was one reason he turned to an affair, as Mrs. Sue was an attractive, intelligent woman who knew how to make an impression. This drew in Jiang Zehan, who was feeling trapped and unhappy in his marriage. Their relationship deepened and eventually they had a child together. This made them realize they wanted to be together officially and legally. However, they understood that Yong Mua and the 2 daughters were major obstacles to their plan. Divorce was not a viable option, as the couple owned considerable assets, including properties and savings accounts. Jiang Ziyan realized that if they divorced, Jiang Mua would receive most of the assets according to the law. Therefore, Mrs. Sue did not hesitate to encourage Jiang Ziyan to murder Jiang Minghua so they could be together without any hindrance about 3 months before the murder, after multiple discussions and planning. Jiang Zan and Mrs. Sue decided to execute a brutal plan to eliminate Jiang Minggu. They considered various methods and finally chose to stage the murder to look like it was committed by someone else, specifically targeting Mrs. Wang and Mrs. Liu, who had previous conflicts with Jiang Minghua. To mislead the police investigation, Jiang Ziyan and Mrs. Sue planned meticulously and in detail. They decided on a night when Jiang Ziyan could create an alibi by staying late at work and returning home early in the morning with colleagues as witnesses. During this time, Jiang Zehan would sneak out and commit the crime before that. He thoroughly studied the area around his house. Learning the routes and security weaknesses, he discovered that the entire area had only one camera that could see the front gate of his house, allowing him to enter the house through another route to avoid the camera. Jiang Zehan purchased the necessary tools such as ropes, gloves, and other equipment. As the police investigation confirmed, it was Jiang Ziyan who snuck into Mrs. Liu's house when she was away and quickly stole her phone. He then sent threatening messages to Jiang Mua the day before the murder so that she would be caught off guard. On April 19, 2006, Jiang Ziyan decided to carry out his heinous act to execute the plan. He used a rope to climb into his house late at night when his wife and daughters were asleep in the darkness. He quietly approached his wife's bedroom. Jiang Zan had prepared an ether-soaked cloth, a strong anesthetic to use on his wife. As he got close to the bed, Jiang Ziyan carefully placed the ether-soaked cloth over his wife's nose and mouth, causing her to lose consciousness. Immediately, he then used a pillow to suffocate her until she died from asphyxiation. While doing this, his 12-year-old woke up and saw the horrific scene in a panic. Jiang Ziyan turned his attention to her. He used the same method, applying the ether-soaked cloth to knock her unconscious before using the pillow to suffocate her. The cries and noises from the struggle woke up his 8-year-old daughter. She cried and panicked at what she saw to silence her. Jiang Ziyan killed her as well. He repeated the same cruel method, anesthetizing her with the ether-soaked cloth before suffocating her with the pillow. During the entire crime, Jiang Zan called Mrs. Sue to report what was happening. Proving his commitment to their plan, Jiang Zan's ruthless actions were driven not only by Mrs. Sue's instigation, but also by his own greed and lack of conscience. After killing his wife and daughters, Jiang Ziyan immediately executed the next part of his plan to mislead the police investigation and frame others. First, he took the ether-soaked cloth used to anesthetize Jiang Mua and his daughters and discarded it in Mrs. Wang's trash can. He believed this would make the police suspect Mrs. Wang's involvement in the crime. Next, Jiang Shan carefully took a piece of cloth and soaked it in Jiang Mina's blood. He then went near Mrs. Wang's window and smeared the blood on it to further implicate her. Additionally, he brought along Mrs. L's stolen cell phone. He placed it near Mrs. Wang's house to create false evidence making the police believe that Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Wang were closely connected to the crime. This was also to ensure both Mrs. L and Mrs. Wang became police suspects, allowing Zhang Jihan to escape suspicion. Zhang Jihan executed these actions meticulously, hoping the police would be deceived by the fabricated evidence and not investigate him. However, his efforts ultimately failed as the police persistently investigated and found inconsistencies in the evidence and testimonies, leading to Zhang Shan's arrest and confession when interrogated by the police. Mrs. Su admitted that she was almost fully aware of the entire incident through phone calls. Mrs. Su testified that on the night of the murders, she received a call from Zhang Jihan. During the call, Zhang Jihan described in detail what he was doing, from climbing into the house with a rope to approaching his wife and 2 daughters. At that moment, Mrs. Su stated that she felt regretful and truly terrified. She tried to stop Yang Jian upon realizing he was about to kill Zhang Minghua, but to no avail. She continuously pleaded with Zhang Shan to stop, especially when he talked about killing the 2 children. However, her pleas could not change Zhang Jihan's mind. In a state of frenzy driven by greed and rage, Zhang Jihan proceeded with his heinous actions. He completely ignored Mrs. Su's begging and went on to murder his 2 daughters. Mrs. Su admitted that while she did not directly participate in the murders, she felt guilty for planning the murders with Zhang Jian and regretted it. Only when it was too late, her testimony helped the police better understand Zhang Jihan's motives and criminal process. The police realized that although Mrs. Su did not directly take part in the murders, she knew about the plan in advance and did not report it. Moreover, she had incited Zhang Jian. This made her legally responsible as well. Her statements not only confirmed Zhang Jian's crimes, but also shed light on the brutality and inhumanity of his actions. In this horrific murder case on May 1st, the Supreme Court sentenced Zhang Jian to death on 3 counts of murder and Mrs. Su to 15 years in prison for being an accessory to murder. This gruesome murder case not only left an unending pain for the victims' loved ones, but also served as a stark reminder of the dangers of greed, selfishness, and irresponsibility within a family. This case shows that love and happiness in a family cannot be built on deceit and betrayal. Zhang Jian's extramarital affair and immoral actions led to a heartbreaking tragedy, resulting in the loss of 3 innocent lives, including 2 young children. The lesson from this case highlights the importance of honesty and responsibility in family relationships. Each individual must be mindful of their actions, carefully consider their decisions, and cherish the happiness of their loved ones. Additionally, the case underscores the need for education and the installation of ethical values in younger generations, helping them understand the consequences of wrongful actions. Finally, we must raise awareness and maintain a determined stance against criminal acts to protect justice and bring peace to the community. Story 4. In our daily lives, sometimes we have to swallow our pride and endure hardships just to survive in a tough work environment. However, this endurance can sometimes lead to immense risks, pushing our lives into the depth of crime. Today's case is a clear and vivid example of the silent crimes that occur in the workplace. Chengwan is a district in Nongjianggu Province, China, known for its picturesque and prosperous scenery, making it a thriving tourist destination. Consequently, the tourism industry, including businesses and tour guides, is highly developed here. Chengwan is also a popular tourist spot, attracting many visitors. Everything was flourishing until early 2003, when a shocking crime shattered the peace of this area at 8:15 p.m. on April 6th. 2003, a tourist named Su Minghua was walking her dog in a park when hers started barking loudly at an empty lot. Sua looked around and saw a sign indicating that the lot belonged to Chiawa, a well-known tourism company in Chongquan. Recently, Chiawa had been expanding into the restaurant and hotel business. This centrally located lot with convenient transportation access was intended for the construction of a large hotel by Chiawa. As a tourist, Sua didn't know much about this. Seeing that the lot was owned and fenced, decided not to go inside to avoid trouble. Unexpectedly, her dog broke free from its leash, slipped through a gap, and ran straight into the lot. Su Ming tried calling her dog back, but it didn't return. She had no choice but to contact the security guard of the lot to get inside and find her dog. However, after searching the entire lot, Sue couldn't find any security guards nor any contact numbers. Just as she was at a loss, her dog returned with a blood-stained piece of cloth in its mouth. Alarmed Sue Minwa immediately called the police. Suspecting a human corpse in the lot, the Chunwan District Police arrived quickly and attempted to contact Chiawa, but received no response until about 9:40 p.m. After confirming the situation, Chiawa sent someone to open the gate for the police to investigate. The lot was filled with scattered construction materials. Following summoning Yu dog to a deeper area, the dog started digging and barking loudly. Soon a piece of brown fabric was exposed. The Chungkwon police immediately called for backup and reported the severity of the situation to higher authorities. With approval, they began excavation. The victim's body was found face down, buried in a pit about 1.5 meters deep, half a meter wide, and 2 meters long. Recent heavy rains had turned the soil to mud, making retrieval difficult. It took over half an hour to care. Extract the intact body. The victim was wrapped in a white plastic sheet, which had torn during transportation, revealing the upper body. Initial examination couldn't determine the cause or time of death, requiring forensic analysis for accurate results. Back at the station, forensic examination commenced. The first step was to clean the body thoroughly to avoid misjudgment. After over 12 hours of continuous work, the forensic team provided preliminary findings. The victim was a male aged 45 to 48 who died between 9 p.m. and midnight on April 2003 from excessive blood loss. The body had numerous wounds, none fatal. Individually but collectively contributing to death, the victim's face was heavily slashed and his genitals were cut off and stuffed in his mouth. Post-mortem, the assailant stabbed the victim in the heart, puncturing it and severing multiple nerves. The hands and feet showed signs of severe binding, and all fingers were completely fractured. The brutality suggested a deep-seated grudge. The crime scene lacked signs of struggle or blood, indicating it was merely a disposal site. Not the murder scene. The lot enclosed by a 1.5-meter fence was private property of Chiawa, inaccessible to outsiders, suggesting the perpetrator was someone within Chiawa, likely with access to the lot's key. After the news broke, many people started to talk about it. Since the victim did not have any identification on him, the police could only investigate based on recent missing person reports among those who had reported someone missing. One individual caught the police's attention: Song Yen, the daughter of Song Ding Yuan, the director of Chiawa Company and the owner of the lot. Where the body was found, the police immediately contacted Song Yin. When she arrived, she was accompanied by her mother, Si. Both women had striking appearances and strong demeanors, but their faces showed clear signs of exhaustion. As soon as they arrived, Son asked the police about the unidentified body. The police took her and Mrs. Song inside to identify if the body was indeed Song Ding Yuan. Upon seeing the body, S. Yen couldn't hold back and ran outside to vomit. Only Mrs. Krong managed to stay composed and examine the sole of the victim's foot. Upon confirming that the body had a large blue birthmark on the sole, she collapsed and fainted. It took a while for Mrs. C. Rong to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, the police took the victim's daughter's statement. Song recounted that on the morning of April 2, 2003, her father, Song Ding Yuan, left the house for a business meeting that day. It was also Song Yan's birthday. Every year, the whole family would gather to celebrate, and Mr. Song had promised to come home early around 6 p.m. On April 2nd, S. Yen called her father to ask him to buy some items. However, his phone was turned off. She thought he was still busy with work, so she and her mother waited until late at night, but he never came back and his phone remained unreachable. S. Yen tried looking for him at his office, but his secretary said he hadn't been to the office that day. She also contacted the business partner her father was supposed to meet, only to learn that they had signed the contract 2 days earlier. At this point, S. Yen could no longer stay calm. She reported her father missing to the police and organized a search, but found nothing on the afternoon of April 3rd. Mr. Song's car was found in a suburban area more than 30 kilometers southwest of the city center. This was a newly developed area that Chiawa Company had purchased at a high price for a resort project. It wasn't unusual for his car to be there, but when Song Yen checked, she discovered the memory card from the car's dashcam was missing with no residents nearby. There were no additional clues. Since then, Song Yen and her mother had been tirelessly searching, but to no avail. They always hoped Mr. Song would return, but now seeing his cold, lifeless body devastated them. Tian also mentioned that her father was a kind and gentle man who treated everyone with respect. Even when subordinates made mistakes, he never punished them harshly at most, deducting some salary from the previous month. As for his family, he was a loving husband and father, always caring for them. Despite being a successful and wealthy man, he never had any affairs or ambiguous relationships with other women. The police collected all necessary information. Yen then took her mother home to arrange Mr. Song's funeral the 8th. Police split into two teams. One went to Mr. Song's company for further investigation, while the other team headed to where Song Yen found his car looking for any additional clues. The first police team to arrive at the company was greeted by the director's secretary, a 25-year-old woman named Chin Jae, when the police asked her about the last time she saw her boss. Chin Jae thought for a moment and then replied, "The last time I saw the director was on the evening of April 1st. After work, he had a meeting with some foreign partners and asked me to prepare some documents. After I handed him the documents, he left with another assistant named Linning. The next day I came to work, but the director didn't show up. San also called the office looking for him but couldn't reach him. Later that evening, she came to the office to check and then left. We've all been searching for the director these past few days. I can't believe he's been murdered at this point." Chinjaya broke down in tears. She expressed that she had a very high regard for Director Song. The police noted her emotions as she spoke. Although she seemed to speak fondly of him, her eyes showed extreme hatred. The police suspected that Chin might be involved, but they had no evidence yet. So they left next. The police sought out the other assistant, Linning. This 20-year-old recent graduate from Nanjing University was a standout in economics, which is why she quickly landed the role of assistant to Mr. Song. When the police found Linning, she was busy handling matters related to the resort project in the suburbs. Surprised by the police's visit, she was informed that Mr. Song Dingyuan had died. Linning expressed that she had no knowledge of this, as she had been on a business trip to Yan since April 3rd. She was only aware that Mr. Song had gone missing. Lining went to the police station to give her statement. She recounted that on the night of April 1st, she accompanied Mr. Song to a business meeting. After the meeting concluded, she left unaware of Mr. Song's subsequent whereabouts. Linning could provide any further information about who Mr. Song might have met, as the business partner required their identity to remain confidential. Until the project's completion, the police didn't gain any useful information from her and let her go during the questioning. Although Linning claimed she didn't know where Mr. Song had gone, her face showed clear signs of tension to ensure she was telling the truth. The police assigned a small team to discreetly monitor her if anything suspicious arose. They would be informed immediately. Another police team went to the location where Mr. Song Denyuan's car was found. According to Song Yen, she had the car brought home to prevent the incident from spreading. The car's interior remained untouched. The police inspected the scene but found no tire tracks due to the rain, and there were no houses nearby. They then checked Mr. Song's car in his garage. Mud from the suburban area still clung to the tires. Song Yen mentioned that her father was very meticulous about cleanliness and would wash his car every few days. The last wash was on April 1st. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination and found a few light brown hairs under the passenger seat. Since both Mrs. Zong and Yen had black hair, these brown hairs likely belonged to another woman who might be linked to Mr. Song Denyuan's death. The police collected the hair sample for a comparison. Currently, there are two individuals with brown hair who had the opportunity to interact with Mr. S. Ding Yuan before his death: Chin Jae and Linning. For now, the police decided to discreetly monitor these two to avoid alerting them. They would only move in once something suspicious was detected. Meanwhile, after a long period of rest, Mr. Song Yuan's wife Zong was stable enough to be interviewed at the police station. She revealed, "My husband and I have been emotionally distant for a long time, but we pretended to be happy for our daughter. Song Yan's sake, after giving birth to Yen, my health deteriorated. Even if I could get pregnant again, it was unlikely I could carry the baby to term. Back then, I thought time and care would heal my body. 2 years later, I got pregnant again despite my efforts. My body was too weak and I miscarried in the 3rd month. Since then, the rift between my husband and me deepened, but we never attempted to reconcile. We've stayed together until now, only for Song Yen. I knew my husband was having an affair. At first I tried to stop it, but I realized there was nothing I could do to change the situation, so I turned a blind eye. The person he was involved with is his assistant, Chen Jie. I have evidence to prove it with that Mrs. Zong took a stack of photos from her bag. The pictures showed Song Ding Yuan and Chin Jie in various intimate poses. In some, Mr. Song was holding Chen Jie by the waist, in others they were kissing. However, the police noted that Chin Jie's face always showed resistance and discomfort none of. The photos showed her reciprocating Mr. Song's advances happily. The police found this puzzling and asked Mrs. Zong if she knew why, but she shook her head, indicating she didn't know. Mrs. Zong added that although she knew about the affair, she didn't want to make a big deal out of it to protect her husband's and the company's reputation. Therefore, she had never confronted Chin Jie directly. This clue was crucial. The police suspected that Chin Jie had developed a conflict with Mr. Song Ding Yuan and had killed him. The police continued to search the area around the body for any cameras that might have captured the suspect disposing of the body. After much effort, they found a surveillance tape at a nearby intersection that showed a corner of the empty lot reviewing the footage at 1:35 a.m. On April 3rd, 2 figures were seen carrying a heavy object covered with a black cloth. The 2 approached from the west corner of the camera's view. They stopped briefly at the lot, one of them unlocking the gate before they both went inside about an hour later at around 2:40 a.m. The 2 individuals left the lot separately. The footage showed them to be small in stature, around 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 6 inches tall, dressed in black and appearing physically weak. They struggled to carry what the police believed to be Mr. Song's body. Previously, when the police asked Mrs. Shirong, who managed the lot near the park, she mentioned that the original documents and keys were split into 2 sets. She kept one set at home and the other set was with Mr. Song's secretary. This lead once again pointed to Chin Jie as the primary suspect. At the same time, the team monitoring Chen Jie reported losing her trail. According to the surveillance team, Chen Jie left the office this evening and went shopping alone at a mall. The police followed her closely but realized something was wrong when she didn't exit a store upon investigating. They discovered she had slipped away unnoticed. All available forces were mobilized to locate Chinhua. A team was dispatched to her home to gather clues upon arrival. They discovered that despite her high-paying job as Mr. Song's secretary, she lived in a rather shabby rental house. Inside, there were no valuable items, just a simple set of furniture and a neatly made bed in the corner. Her wardrobe was also cleared out, indicating she had planned her escape in advance. At that moment, a woman from next door returned home and saw the police surrounding Chun's house. She asked, "What's going on? Did Chenna do something illegal?" The police didn't provide details, only saying they needed to bring Chen Jie in for questioning. Related to an investigation, the neighbor responded, "I knew it. I always suspected something like this would happen. Let me tell you, Chinjaya has a father who is an alcoholic, a mother who is a gambling addict, and a brother who is in jail for a hit and run. Growing up in such an environment, she couldn't possibly turn out to be a good person. I've seen her with an older man. Many times, the police asked, "Can you remember the last time you saw her with this man?" The neighbor thought for a moment and said, I believe it was around noon on April 2nd. I was cooking and saw her leave the house. There was a middle-aged man waiting at the gate. I haven't seen that man around here since then." The police showed her a photo of Mr. Song and she confirmed that he was the man she had seen. The police collected a few strands of hair left in Chin's house to compare with the sample found in Mr. Song's car, then left. Meanwhile, the team monitoring Linning reported that she was heading out carrying a large bag. Seemingly planning to flee, the command was given to discreetly follow her. They suspected Linning might be planning to escape with Chun. Jay arresting her immediately could scare Chin Jie into fleeing. First, the police quietly tailed Linning when she reached the train station and met Chin Jie in a secluded corner. The police moved in and arrested them both within 10 minutes. Lining and Chuna surrendered and were taken to the station for questioning. They were placed in separate interrogation rooms. Initially, Chin remained silent, knowing the police lacked direct evidence linking them to Mr. Song's murder. Lining, however, was a 20-year-old inexperienced girl under the combined pressure of threats, cajoling, and the incriminating footage of them disposing of Mr. Song's body. Lining broke down and confessed. Lining revealed her tough upbringing in a large, impoverished family. Her parents had unstable jobs and frequently fought leaving the family. In perpetual poverty when Lining was 8, her parents died in a car accident. Her 2 older sisters were sent to an orphanage. Her younger brother was adopted by a wealthy family, and Lining was taken in by her grandparents. Despite their poverty, her grandparents scraped together money to ensure Lin could attend school. She studied hard, hoping to repay their kindness. One day, when she was accepted into college, her grandfather passed away, followed by her grandmother, who fell ill from grief in a short period. Lining lost her only remaining family, leaving her devastated. During this time, Lining reconnected with Chin Jaya, an upperclassman who had helped her through tough times before. After graduating, Chin Jae secured a high-paying job, but then lost contact with Lining. As their paths diverged, their relationship grew distant until Lining graduated with honors and applied for an assistant position at Chiawa Company, where Chun Jae worked. She was disappointed when Chun Jae pretended not to know her and rejected her application. Unexpectedly, Mr. Song noticed Lining and hired her the next day, dragging her into a web of exploitation and abuse. Chin Jaya had initially tried to protect Lining, but was eventually forced to comply with Mr. Song's demands. She became determined to stop Mr. Song's abuse and concocted a plan with Lining to kill him and dispose of his body, leading to the events that followed. Later, Lining graduated with honors. She saw a job posting for an assistant position at Chiawa Company and decided to apply. To her surprise, the interviewer was Chen Jae. Lining was thrilled, thinking Chen Jae would recognize her efforts and hire her. However, Chenhua acted like she didn't know Lining and rejected her application without hesitation. Lining was extremely disappointed. As she was leaving, she accidentally bumped into director Song Ding Yuan. Seeing her face, he couldn't help but ask her name and why she was there. Lining honestly replied that she had come for an interview but was turned down. Mr. Song simply smiled and walked away. The next day, Lining received a notification that she had been hired when she started working at the company. She learned that it was Mr. Song who had hired her. Lining felt very grateful to him for giving her the opportunity, not realizing she had walked into a trap initially. Song Dingyuan rarely interacted with Lining, but after her 3-month probation period ended, everything changed. Lining was told she had to go on a 3-day business trip to Yan with the director. She naively thought this would be a great opportunity for learning and growth. However, once they arrived, Song Dingyuan took Lining to a clothing store and picked out a tight-fitting dress for her. He then brought her to a luxury hotel. She entered a large room where 3 or 4 men around Song Dingyuan's age were waiting. As soon as Lining stepped in, one of them approached her, handed her a drink, and forced her to consume it. Lining tried to seek help from Mr. Song, but he ignored her. The men continued to force her to drink. She attempted to escape, but the door was locked. The men didn't pretend anymore. They surrounded Lining, carried her to a table, and began to assault her. One of them tore her dress and started groping and kissing her all over. Lining struggled to break free, but was overpowered by the 4 or 5 men. They took turns raping her, ignoring her cries and pleas for mercy. That night became the most horrifying memory of Lin Ying's life. She never imagined she would fall into the hands of such beasts and endure such physical and emotional trauma afterward. Lining wanted to take Mr. Song and his accomplices to court, but she lacked evidence and money. Moreover, Mr. Song had a recording of the assault and threatened to release it. If she spoke out for a 20-year-old girl, this was a devastating blow. Lining even contemplated suicide to escape her torment. At her lowest point, Chen Jae reappeared in her life, offering to help Lining get revenge. The two of them devised a plan to lure Song Ding out and kill him on April 2nd. Chen Jie found an excuse to meet Mr. Song to keep his affair a secret from his wife and daughter. He lied, saying he had to meet a business partner around noon. He picked Chen Jie up from her home and took her to a house he had purchased in the suburbs. This house was conveniently close to the plot where Chiawa Company planned to build a resort. In the car, Chen Jie overheard Mr. Song making vulgar remarks about Lining, further solidifying her resolve to kill him upon arrival. While Mr. Song was showering, Chen Jiawa slipped a sleeping pill into his orange juice when he drank it. He quickly became dizzy and collapsed. Chen Jie called Lining over and together they tied him up. When Mr. Song regained consciousness, they tortured him with a knife until he died. Lining then created a diversion by driving Mr. Song's car to the empty lot where the resort was planned. She returned and helped Xinhua move his body to an empty lot near the park. They chose this location because it was owned by the company and used and had no cameras or frequent visitors. Chinjaya, who had the keys, knew it would be an ideal spot. The two women dug a shallow grave, but due to their limited strength, the grave was not deep enough, causing Mr. Song's body to resurface. After hearing Li Ying's account, the police asked who the mastermind behind the plan was. Lining admitted that she had devised the plan and killed Mr. Song, while Chen Jie only assisted her. The police informed Chen Jie of Lin Ying's confession. Chen Jie then broke her silence, claiming she was the one who planned and executed the murder and that Lining was merely coerced into helping the police. Doubted her story, prompting Chuna to share her life story to explain her motive for killing Mr. Song. Chuna, like Lining, had a difficult childhood. As the eldest child, she had to manage everything at home. Her parents were both addicts, her father to alcohol and her mother to gambling, and her younger brother had a disability when Chunja reached middle school. Her parents wanted her to quit school to work, but she refused. She sought help from her teachers and child protection services, eventually forcing her parents to let her continue her education. This, however, only deepened their resentment towards her. Mr. Chin often went out drinking with friends and would come home late looking for reasons to berate or sometimes beat Chinhua. Mrs. Chun, addicted to gambling, sold off valuable items to fund her habit. If she won, she would give Chin Jie small allowance. If she lost, she would take out her anger on her. Her brother, a bully, frequently harassed Chin Jie and forced her to work extra jobs to support his lifestyle. Despite this, Chana persevered, determined to finish high school and save enough money for college, planning to escape her nightmarish home. When Chana was 17, her brother got involved in a robbery with a gang during a police chase. The driver caused an accident. The driver blamed Chen Jia's brother, leading to his arrest. Her parents, unable to pay the restitution, demanded Chunu as savings. When she refused, they beat her and threw her out. Chunjiawa struggled to balance school and work, but was fortunate to have a kind teacher who provided her shelter. She eventually graduated and entered university, finally escaping her abusive home. However, her parents continued to harass her at school until she agreed to support them financially. As time went on, Chenhua was close to completing her studies. It was then that she ran into Lining. They quickly became close friends, almost like sisters. Lining often helped her deal with the troubles caused by her parents. After graduating, Chinjia landed a job at Chiawa Company, not realizing it would become her personal hell. Initially, she believed that hard work would lead to success. Just as Lining had thought, one day after finishing her work, Chinjie was called into Mr. Song's office. He offered her a glass of juice. After drinking it, she felt dizzy and weak when she tried to leave. Mr. Song restrained her and raped her. When she regained consciousness, she felt immense physical pain and shame, leading to a long period of depression. She lacked the courage to quit or report the incident to the police. Despite the trauma, Chen Jie continued working at Chiawa. Resigning herself to using her body to gain benefits for her money was the priority, and she aimed to save enough to leave. She also didn't want other girls to suffer the same fate, so she would reject female applicants for the secretary position. Things seemed to progress as planned until Lining applied for the position, wanting to protect her friend from the same fate. Chen Jie rejected her. However, Lining caught Mr. Song's attention and was eventually hired during their time at the company. Chin Jae tried to shield Lining from Mr. Song, but Mr. Song sent Chin Jae on a business trip and took Lining to Yan, where he and his friends assaulted her after the incident. Lining fighted in Chinhua, who in a fit of rage planned to kill Mr. Song and dispose of his body. Both women confessed to the murder, so the police took them to the crime scene to reconstruct the events. Chenji was able to recount everything easily, while Lining broke down in tears. Forensic analysis confirmed that the hair sample from Mr. Song's car matched Chin Jae-z with both witness testimony and physical evidence. The court sentenced Chena to death for the brutal nature of the crime. Lining received a 15-year prison sentence for being an accomplice. During the crime, Lining was so terrified that she covered her eyes, and all the injuries on Mr. Song were inflicted by Chin. Lining only helped to dispose of the body, which is why her sentence was lighter in life. Many people don't get to choose their paths. Chin Jaya once had a promising future, but individuals like Song Dingyuan turned her into a cold-blooded killer. Hopefully, Lining will be able to start over and live a better life when she is released, at least. Story 5, we will delve into what is considered one of the most brutal cases in Singapore's history. It was so horrifying that it even haunted the most seasoned investigators, a 23-year-old. Girl from Myanmar named Pong Naidon left her homeland with dreams of a better life. When she arrived in the unfamiliar country of Singapore, she believed that through her hard work and determination, she could change the lives of her family and herself. However, for over a year, she endured inhumane torture that can only be described as hellish. So, what exactly happened to Pong Naidon? She was born on June 13, 1992, in a remote village in Chin State, Myanmar. Her parents were farmers. At that time, Myanmar's economy was extremely underdeveloped, and Chin was one of the poorest states in the country. Their village was nestled deep in the mountains, about 43 miles of rugged terrain from the nearest town. Life was incredibly difficult there, to the point where even a full meal was a rare luxury for her family. This hardship was partly because Pong Naidon's family was so large. Her parents had a total of 11 children, and Pong was the third eldest life. Already tough became even more challenging when both of her parents passed away when she was just 4 years old. The burden of the family fell heavily on the shoulders of her very young older siblings over the next decade. 5 of Pong's younger siblings tragically died from hunger and illness. Although she was fortunate enough to attend school, Pong had to give up her education at the age of 15 to take on the responsibility of caring for her family, with many younger siblings still in need of care. She returned home and devoted herself entirely to working. The following years of Pong's life were a relentless cycle of hard labor. At the age of 18, she met and began a romantic relationship with a young man from her village in 2012. Although they were not married, Pong Naidon became pregnant with her boyfriend's child. However, he did not want to take responsibility and fled. Despite her family's dire circumstances, Pong refused to abandon her child. The following year, she gave birth to a baby boy and started her life as a single mother to support her child. And her family, she began doing odd jobs at a nearby construction site. Hauling bricks and stones was grueling work and the pay was low, but she had no other options while working. Pong happened to hear about attractive job opportunities in Singapore where the monthly income was at least 3 to 4 times what she was earning. Many women from Myanmar had already gone to Singapore to work as domestic helpers, and this sparked a glimmer of hope in Pong's mind. Despite her limited education and never having left her hometown, Pong was determined to give it a try. She told herself Pong planned to work in Singapore for about 3 years. She calculated that with the money she saved during that time, she could return home by land and build a new house. After discussing it with her siblings, she decided to leave her young son in the care of her sister while she was away. Although Pong's family was worried, they supported her decision because they saw it as a chance to escape poverty. After making this important decision, Pong Adan began preparing for her journey to Singapore. However, Singapore requires foreign domestic workers to be at least 23 years old, and Pong had not yet reached that age. Faced with this obstacle, Pong decided to pay someone to alter her birth date, making her appear 2 months older with her passport in hand. Pong Gan arrived in Singapore in May 2015, carrying the hope of a brighter future for herself and her family. When Pong arrived in Singapore, it was like stepping into a completely different world. This country was far more developed than her homeland, and everything filled her with curiosity and excitement. Before she could officially start working, Pong had to go through thorough training, complete all necessary registration procedures, and meet the requirements set by the employment agency. After successfully navigating these steps, Pong officially became a domestic worker and was quickly hired by a family. Her employer was a 35-year-old housewife named Guthrie Moran. The family had 2 young children, a 4-year-old daughter and a baby boy. Just a few months old for a Singaporean family with small children, hiring a domestic worker is a common and necessary choice. However, one noteworthy detail was that before hiring people, Pong, this family had already gone through 4 domestic workers, all of whom left under unclear and troubled circumstances. Pong was now their 5th domestic worker. The GTH family lived in an apartment at 145 Bishan Street, 11 located in the central area of Singapore. The apartment had 3 bedrooms, which is considered quite spacious in a densely populated city like Singapore. However, in addition to Gaither and her 2 young children, the household also included her 37-year-old husband Kevin Chellam, who was a police officer, and her 57-year-old mother Prema S. Nanami. Moreover, there were 2 other tenants living in the apartment, including Pong Naidon. There were a total of 8 people crowded into this apartment on May 28th. When Pong first stepped into G's home, she told herself, "This will be my home in Singapore." For at least the next year, maybe even longer, she resolved to get used to this new living environment, even though it was much more cramped and crowded than she had ever imagined. Pong's main responsibilities were to care for the 2 children, clean the house, cook, and handle all other household chores. Although the work was demanding for someone like Pong, who had grown up enduring hardship, these tasks did not seem too difficult in the days that followed. Pong Naidon worked diligently, striving to complete all her tasks perfectly in hopes of pleasing her employer. However, that hope quickly faded when she realized that her work environment was not what she had expected. Her employer, Gaither, was extremely strict and had incredibly high expectations for everything. She constantly complained about Pong criticizing her for eating too much, working too slowly, and not being clean enough. Moreover, Gaither rarely showed any signs of satisfaction or even a hint of a smile. This made Pong feel a bit disheartened, but since she was there to earn money, she endured it after all. Money never comes easily. To avoid angering her employer, Pong could only work harder and try not to provoke any scolding. However, her efforts seemed to be in vain. No matter how hard Pong tried, she faced daily reprimands and criticisms. What made it worse was that not only GA theory, but also her mother Prema began to closely monitor Pong with strict supervision. Initially, the mother and daughter only scolded her verbally, but as time went on, their treatment became increasingly severe. They even forbade Pong from using her phone, deprived her of any rest time, including the 1 day off per week that she was supposed to receive in this difficult situation. Pong reluctantly agreed to work overtime, partly due to the pressure from her employers and partly in hopes of earning extra income. Pong consoled herself by thinking that if she endured and worked hard, she would soon save enough money to return home. Time passed until October, and despite Pong becoming more obedient and complying with all her employers' demands, her situation did not improve. The abuse escalated. Beyond verbal insults to frequent physical beatings, even so, Pong continued to endure her harsh upbringing, and years of hardship had conditioned her to tolerate suffering as a means of survival. However, Pong's submission only made Gaither and her mother more ruthless. They not only slapped her, pulled her hair, punched and kicked her, but also used various tools to torment her. On one occasion, they even pressed a hot iron against her arm. In addition to the physical abuse, Pong's life was strictly controlled. She was only allowed to sleep for 5 hours each night and was not permitted to rest during the day. She was given only leftover food and soaked bread to eat. Even her bathroom breaks were severely restricted under the relentless torment from Gaither, and her mother Pong became increasingly frail and emaciated, and her mental state began to deteriorate. During a medical checkup, a doctor noticed multiple scars on Pong's body. However, Gaither explained that Pong often worked in a hurry, causing her to fall several times, and the scars were the result of those falls. G's husband Kevin also reported to the employment agency that their domestic worker had many issues. However, when the agency suggested replacing her, he declined. Additionally, Pong did not report her situation to the agency, so the matter eventually subsided at 7:30 a.m. on July 26, 2016, which was the 14th month since Pong had come to work for the family. G found Pong lying on the floor, not getting up to work. Angered, she and her mother shook Pong forcefully, but there was no response. They tried everything they could, but Pong remained unresponsive at this point. They became extremely alarmed at 9:30 a.m. There called a doctor named Quan Wai-Chi, stating that someone at her home was injured and urgently needed help. However, Dr. Quan said he was attending to other patients and couldn't leave immediately. He suggested calling an ambulance, but the Gaither refused and insisted on waiting for Dr. Quan to arrive. It wasn't until 10:50 a.m. that Dr. Quan finally arrived. After a preliminary examination, he determined that Pong showed no signs of life and had been dead for some time. Upon hearing this, Gaither became anxious and quickly lied, saying that can't be true. I just saw her move a moment ago when Dr. Quan saw the animated body of the domestic worker. He immediately suspected something was terribly wrong. He insisted that Gaither called the police right away and told her he would leave only after the police arrived. However, Gaither hesitated and instead called her husband to inform him of the situation and urged him to come home immediately, sensing something amiss. Dr. Quan decided to call the police himself at 11:26 a.m. Forensic specialists conducted an examination and found that the victim, Pong Don, who was 24 years old, weighed only 53 pounds with such severe malnutrition. And a weight like that, even normal daily life would have been challenging, let alone regular household work. According to her medical records, when Pong first arrived at the household on May 18, 2016, she weighed 86 pounds in 14 months. Her weight had decreased by 38%. Additionally, there were at least 31 new injuries and 47 older ones on her body. Her right arm had burns from an iron. Her neck was covered in injuries and her hyoid bone was fractured. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation following severe trauma to the neck. Based on the findings, the police concluded that Pong Gon had endured prolonged inhumane abuse before her death, and the primary suspects were her employer Gaither and her family. The police immediately arrested G, they and her mother. Her husband Kevin, who was a police officer, was also arrested in the following days. G, their Moran and her mother were charged with first-degree murder. Although Kevin had an alibi at the time of the incident which prevented him from being charged with first-degree murder, he was still held accountable for the prolonged abuse Pong had suffered and faced charges of grievous bodily harm. Additionally, his position as a police officer was suspended since the crime occurred within a private residence. There were no witnesses, and the suspects adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming they never harmed the domestic worker. This led to a severe lack of evidence, complicating the investigation. However, ever after the case was made public, it caused a major uproar in Singapore. A Singaporean resident, after watching the news, immediately provided the police with a crucial piece of evidence: the hard drive from the surveillance cameras in G's home. This evidence revealed the brutal truth behind the death of the domestic worker, Pong. It turned out that Kevin had installed several cameras in the house. Initially, his intention was to monitor the domestic worker and their children, but these cameras ultimately became the strong evidence against his family. In this case, during the investigation into the surveillance footage, a suspicious detail emerged. Kevin told the police that at the beginning of 2008-2016, he had removed the cameras at the request of a tenant. However, the investigation revealed that the cameras were dismantled after the incident had occurred. He feared that this evidence would be detrimental to his wife and mother-in-law, so he deliberately attempted to destroy it. Due to this action, Kevin faced additional charges of perjury and evidence tampering upon reviewing the footage. The police discovered recordings from June 21, 2016 to July 26, 2016. When they carefully examined the content, they were shocked by the brutal acts of violence that Pong had endured before her death. On the evening of June 21st, Gaither took a bottle of ice water from the refrigerator and poured it directly over Pong's head at 7:51 a.m. on June 24th. While Pong was ironing clothes, Gathery suddenly entered the room. hit Pong on the head and left, she quickly returned and pressed the hot iron against Pong's forehead and right arm at 4:30 p.m. On July 13th, because G believed the kitchen and kitchen floor tiles were not cleaned properly, she dragged Pong into the kitchen, verbally abused her, slapped her in the face, and punched her in the stomach. She then held a knife to Pong's head at 12:26 a.m. On July 15th, Gathery ordered Pong to go to the window where she tied her up with a rope. Although Pong pleaded for mercy, G showed no concern. It wasn't until 5:41 a.m. that she finally untied Pong. The reality was that from July 15th to July 26th, for 12 consecutive nights, Pong was tied to the window with a rope. She had to sleep on the cold floor and was sometimes doused with cold water by G theory. The surveillance footage from those 35 days revealed that Pong Aiden was never allowed to eat a full meal each day. She was given only soaked bread or a small amount of cold leftover food. This led to her becoming extremely thin and weak. Pong was not allowed to bathe, was deprived of proper meals, and was forced to work nonstop every day, which caused her body to become severely malnourished and her mental state to deteriorate significantly. At 11:40 p.m. on July 25th, while Pong was washing clothes, they accused her of being too slow and repeatedly struck her hard on the neck and pulled her hair. The blows were so forceful that Pong staggered near the bathroom door. But GAA theory didn't stop. She continued to hit Pong hard on the head, causing her to collapse to the floor. Despite her best efforts, Pong was unable to get back on her feet. However, G believed that Pong was pretending to faint to avoid work, so she called her mother over and together they used the cold water hose. The bathroom to douse Pong's head after soaking her. They dragged her into a room, tied her hands to the window, kicked her in the stomach, and forced her to sleep on the floor in wet clothes. By this time, Pong was extremely weak. She managed to say, "Please let me have something to eat. I'm so hungry." But this simple request was ignored by G and her mother. At 12:11 a.m. on July 26. There suddenly approached Pong God and kicked her hard in the stomach and reminded her not to oversleep. At 4:57 a.m. There got up again when she couldn't wake Pong. She flew into a rage. She not only punched and kicked her, but also repeatedly stomped on Pong's head and neck, pulled her hair back violently, and assaulted her neck. The forensic experts concluded that Pong's hyoid bone likely fractured during this final assault, and it was at this point that she died from asphyxiation. After this beating, Pong no longer responded. It was only then that GA theory and her mother realized something was seriously wrong. However, instead of trying to save her, they continued to douse Pong with cold water when she still didn't wake up. They simply went back to sleep that morning. Kevin also saw Pong lying on the floor, but perhaps because he had become accustomed to such scenes, he paid little attention and left for work. After thoroughly reviewing the surveillance footage, the police compiled 115 charges against G. The most of these were related to abuse and causing bodily harm. However, the prosecutor decided to pursue only 28 of these charges, while the remaining 87 would be considered during sentencing. In theory, with such clear evidence, the trial should have been straightforward and swift. A conviction seemed only a matter of time and adhering to the law. However, contrary to expectations, the trial became unexpectedly complicated and prolonged. While awaiting trial, both Gay and her mother claimed that they were suffering from severe mental illnesses. In response to these claims, the prosecutor immediately called in specialists to evaluate them. This evaluation process took 4 years, and was only completed in April 2020. The final conclusion was that both individuals indeed had mental disorders. There was diagnosed with 2 conditions. First, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD, characterized by excessive concern with order, strictness, and perfectionism, setting high standards for oneself and others. Second, postpartum depression with symptoms, including prolonged depressed moods, manifesting as sadness, fatigue, tearfulness, and frequent crying. Patients often feel oppressed, gloomy, and easily irritated by trivial matters. The psychiatrist concluded that these 2 disorders contributed to G's extreme irritability and anger, ultimately leading to the death of Pong Naiden due to her mental illness. Her charge of murder was reduced to first-degree manslaughter, and she avoided the death penalty. The maximum sentence could be life imprisonment with caning. but since she is a woman, she will be exempt from caning on February 3, 2021. The trial of Gaither officially began at the Supreme Court of Singapore, given the substantial evidence against her, and realizing that she couldn't escape conviction, she pled guilty to 1 count of manslaughter and 27 charges related to abuse. At this point, her defense attorney argued that Gaither suffered from several illnesses and that a miscarriage in February 2016 had worsened her condition. He contended that her actions were not intentional and requested the court to consider a sentence of just 14 years in prison. However, the prosecutor argued that G's actions toward the domestic worker were extremely cruel, far beyond what any human being should be capable of. Furthermore, during the time of the crimes, she was fully aware of her actions with a clear purpose and understanding of what she was doing. Therefore, the prosecutor insisted that she should receive the harshest penalty, which was life imprisonment. Initially, the final verdict was expected to be announced on April 29th, but perhaps fearing a life sentence, there made a move. She changed her lawyer and renegotiated with the prosecutor, hoping that they might reduce her charge from first-degree manslaughter to second-degree manslaughter. If successful, her final sentence could be reduced to around 15 years on June 22nd. The trial resumed. Gay's new lawyer directly requested a sentence of 8 to 9 years in prison, arguing that the domestic worker Pong Nai-don had contributed to worsening Gay's mental condition. He also mentioned that the 4 previous domestic workers had not been abused naturally. The prosecutor continued to demand the maximum sentence for Gay. After hearing both sides, the judge delivered the final verdict. Their Moran was sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to the judge, this case was beyond words, characterized by the extreme brutality of the defendant, and thus a lenient sentence was out of the question. However, the fact that the defendant suffered from mental illness was also acknowledged, making 30 years a relatively appropriate sentence without the influence of mental illness. The judge stated he would have had no hesitation in sentencing Gay to life imprisonment. Despite her repeated attempts to appeal and find reasons to have her sentence reduced, all of Gay's appeals were rejected. The 3 appellate judges concluded that Gaither Moran showed no remorse for killing Pong Nai-don after her arrest. Her only concern was finding ways to induce her sentence. As for Prema S. Narayansamy, she faced a total of 50 charges but was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder on January 9, 2023. Prema's trial officially began. The prosecutor argued that her actions towards Pong were extremely severe and requested a sentence of 14 to 16 years in prison. The defense cited her illness, tragic life, and other reasons in an attempt to seek leniency. Ultimately, the judge determined that Prema's actions were too cruel and sentenced her to 14 years in prison. One particularly interesting aspect of this brutal case is that during the investigation, it was Prema who asked Kevin to remove the cameras and keep the hard drive. However, fearing a police search, Kevin handed it over to a friend who later turned the evidence over to the authorities. Exposing the truth for this, the court added another 3 years to Prema's sentence, bringing her total time in prison to 17 years. Finally, there's Kevin Shellam. Although he did not directly abuse the domestic worker, it was clear he was aware of what his wife and mother-in-law were doing to Pong. He was sometimes present when Pong was being beaten, but never intervened, according to Gia. This testimony, Kevin also hit Pong. Though this did not match Prema's account, Kevin eventually faced 5 charges, including perjury evidence tampering and causing grievous hurt. However, for reasons unknown, his trial has yet to conclude. After the case became public, the people of Singapore were outraged by the actions of Gia's family towards Pong Nai-don. As a result, a humanitarian organization in Singapore launched a fundraising campaign in just 6 days. They raised over 000 Singapore dollars. The entire amount was donated to Pong's family when Pong's family learned of her death. They were devastated. Her sister told the press that Pong had gone to Singapore for the sake of her son and family, but tragically, she died just over a year later. Pong's brother then traveled to Singapore to bring her body back home in memory of their unfortunate sister. They placed a cross in front of their house. Pong went to Singapore with hopes for a better future, but what she never expected was that her employer would turn out to be a monster. In disguise, her obedience and endurance only emboldened them, leading to her losing her precious life in the end. as the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper. Thank you for joining me here at Sherlock Holmes True Crime. Stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware, even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. If you've enjoyed tonight's tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.